quickly. I was president for 1 year back during the COVID pandemic. Was off for 2 years while Katie was president, and came back now to be president again. So clearly I keep coming back. I think this is a great organization. I think we do a lot of wonderful things here in the community. DRCA was actually one of our first experiences in Delray. When my wife and I moved here in 2017, we were looking at how can we learn more about the neighborhood, get plugged in, get to meet some of the other wonderful people here that we had heard so much about before we came. Rebuilding together happened to be that weekend, so DRCA and DRVA came together, had a volunteer team with Rebuilding Together. It's kind of like Habitat for Humanity, where you do some work on a home in the neighborhood for a neighbor in need. So we got plugged in with a team there, was able to help volunteer with that, met some wonderful people, and the rest is history. Here, president today of the organization. So I do truly believe in the work that we do, Delray citizens. And part of our tagline is bringing neighbors together. So things exactly like this, bringing everyone together for some of the important conversations that we need to have here in the city about what is it that we want want our future to look like. And this is exactly why we're here, preservation workshop. So we have some wonderful minds in our organization that said, hey, preservation is important to a lot of our community members. We want to come together to learn more about what does that look like, what is the Town of Potomac Historic District all about, what even went into bringing about the Town of Potomac Historic District. And moving forward, we see some neighborhood changes, we see homes being changed and renovated and don't look the same as what they had been before. And so there's some sense that some of this historic nature may be lost moving forward. And so we need to learn more about what options exist to protect some of that history. What is it that we want to see as a community? And then how do we implement those tools? So that's really what today is about, coming together, learning more, and seeing what the future could look like. So I want to say thank you to a number of members. So thank you, one, we have in attendance of Warwick Village Citizens Association President Amy Anda. So thank you so much for being here. We have our members of the Historic Committee. Rod is our chair. We have Stephanie, Lee, the Pauls, Paul Hare and Paul DeCourt. And I'm sorry, anyone else from the Historic Committee here that I did not mention? Lisa, sorry Lisa. Lisa does anything and everything. She's on our board, and she is our important liaison from the Executive Board to the Historic Committee. So thank you so much to all of you for all of the work that you've done to bring this about. So I look forward to hearing from you all, and thank you to my Executive Board as well, especially Elaine in here for helping make this happen. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Rod here for the next steps.
Hey, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Just back, forward and backwards.
Slides.
That's it.
Dave, do you need me to use the mic, or is it okay?
It's up to you, just ask, if people can hear
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good, thanks. Hi, good morning, thank you for coming. My name is Rod Cooper, for those of you who don't know me. And this workshop is really a product of first the Executive Board, about a year and a half ago, rejuvenating this committee to try to have us look at things we might want to do. I think that might have been in large part a response to, in 2023, a nonprofit group called Preservation Virginia, which is the state analog to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, named the Town of Potomac as one of the 11 most endangered historic sites in the Commonwealth. And they made a series of recommendations of what we could do as a city and a community to try to protect it from further degradation. Anyway, I just want to get a sense of who's in the room. Who's lived here less than 5 years? Okay, less than 20. Who's been here since the district was created in 1992? Okay, well, it's a mixed bag. So I'm going to sort of give Town of Potomac History 101. In 1992, I was half my age. I was 35 years old, and on top of the world as president of this great organization. And we were challenged by the city to do something to help this community restart, essentially. Delray was always like Delray, you see today. There were probably 3 restaurants. There are lots of, I would call it blue-collar businesses like exterminators and auto parts stores and places that really, they belonged here, but they were from another era. They weren't serving the community that we hope we're going to be creating. So at the time, the city in 1991 embarked upon an effort after 40 years to rewrite the master plan for the city. That means every community had its own master plan. We had one called Potomac, small area plan, which is still in existence. And we thought as an association, it might be nice to sort of dovetail the creation of this district, explore the creation of the district as a way to sort of underpin the foundation for the small area plan, which in large part downzoned Delray from a height of 140 feet on the avenue to 45 feet. And it also didn't change the zoning for lots. So duplexes, single-family homes, but they didn't encourage a lot of multifamily housing. And a lot of that was in response to city understanding that they had this special little place that within the Beltway still looks like the small town it was in 1908 when it was founded as part of Arlington County. So I approached a professor at Virginia Tech's architecture school, which is in Old Town, and said, I would like a project for your students. And her name was Susan Escherick, and she was great. And for a year, her students walked every block in the town of Potomac, and we knew what the boundaries were, and looked at every house, took Polaroid pictures, and went home and typed up on a typewriter their notes on what describing the house, its history, and all of that was assembled into a large book that was submitted to first the Interior, State of Virginia's Department of Historic Resources, and then in 1991 the state approved the district, and in 1992 the federal government, the Interior Department, placed the entire district on the National Register of Historic Places. At the time, it was beyond our wildest dreams as a community, as a civic association, that we would ever be so successful that people would be tearing down buildings to build other buildings. So there was never any real discussion in the community about going the route Old Town, or Parker Ray went, and creating a local historic district with its own set of rules and an overlay, including review by the Board of Architecture Review. What happened over time at the town of Potomac, Delray got really high, as you all know. People want to move here, they're paying premium prices to live here. The character of the community has changed a great deal in 35 years. It used to be very much a blue-collar community. There were still people here in that period of time who had been children and lived in the town of Potomac. And their fathers and grandfathers, maybe they worked in the rail yards. 1/3 of people in Delray worked in the rail yards. The other 2/3 either worked here on small businesses or they commuted into DC. So why is the town of Potomac important? I'll just read this from the National Register nomination. Because of course, nobody famous lived here. There were no battles fought here. This is a community that demonstrates something that in most parts of America has been lost, and that is, it's a good example, a planned suburban community meant to be served by mass transit, the rail yards at Potomac Yard, trolley car that went to Commonwealth Avenue, and to provide housing for people who are working for the ever-expanding federal government. And that's why it's important as a whole, as a place where you walk and have a sense of community and neighborhood. That's what made it worthy of being approved by both the state and federal government as an historic district. So where does that take us now? Obviously, it's only a small part of Delray. Do we have a map?
Yeah, we do. About that.
Great, okay. So I mean, this is the town of Potomac. It's Bellefonte North, and it's kind of cut up here. This wasn't in the district initially because this is industrial. This is where the racetrack was. There we go. But this is it. However, it's surrounded by the rest of Delray that you're going to hear a presentation about. We call it Greater Delray. And if you think of the town of Potomac as about 40% of Delray, and the other is just sort of out there waiting to be taken care of if we decide we want to do that as a community. When you cross the street from Bellefonte, onto this side of Bellefonte, the architecture's the same. It's four squares and Queen Anne's and Victorians and bungalows. It's just that they were not within the boundaries of the town of Potomac. Can someone hand me that map that's leaning up against the back there? No, the other one. The one that in the frame. So what we're looking at here, this is a 1915 map of Alexandria as it existed. There's the Delray boundary. They didn't bother to put Delray because we were part of Alexandria. But as you can see, most of the space here is open. It was farmland. So this area between Bellefonte and Braddock Road, between Mount Vernon and Commonwealth, was largely undeveloped. All there was this one street called Park Addition. It's now East Alexandria Avenue, and it connected with Braddock Heights, which, if you know Braddock Heights, there's some really nice houses up there, and they date from the Civil War. So that's all there was. And so there's been some discussion, and it started years ago. I was like, why, how come I'm not in the district if I live in Delray? Well, because you've got to be in this pink area. So part of what can be contemplated is the creation of a separate district. It wouldn't be an add-on. It has to be a separate district that you could call Greater Delray, whatever you want to call it. But the idea would be to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood beyond that which we have now. If you pass this around, do you all know the difference between a local district and a not a local district? Okay, so this is a map of the historic districts in Alexandria. In the blue are districts, two of them, Old Town and Parker Gray. They are both a federal district and a state district, but they're also a local historic district. Old Town, actually called the Old Historic District, was one of the first, was it the second?
In the country, yes.
The second district in the country. Parker Gray came later to memorialize what became a community of free African Americans who came here during and after the Civil War. And then in green, we have Rosemont, Town of Potomac, Park Fairfax, a little piece of Fairlington. These are all federal and state historic districts that do not have local protection. So part of today's discussion, I hope will lead you to think about, do I want local protection? If so, how strict should it be? And what would be the point of protecting anything, right? Because progress does happen. You can't close your eyes to that. As one of our committee members says, you can't put the entire neighborhood in amber forever. But you can do the kind of things we've been doing for decades in Delray as an association. That's to try to manage change, to adapt to the new realities of how people want to live, but also preserving the reason people live here. They want to live in a little small town that they grew up in. I hear that a lot. We had a booth at Garden Fest about 3 months ago, was that? And it was amazing, of the 80 or 90 people who approached us, half of them, and we asked, why do you live here? It's a small town. And that's something to be valued because it doesn't really exist anywhere else in the city. I don't think Old Town is quite like that anymore because there's so many tourists. Anyway. I'd rather have you guys ask questions that I may not be answering about this creation and what it means. Yeah.
For those of us in the back rows, could you just tell us the names, the modern names of the boundaries of the pink area?
Well, the south is Bellefonte Avenue. Okay, on the west, this is Commonwealth, and then it weaves around the school and library property here. And then the east side of Mount Vernon Avenue is included, not the west side, because for some reason that's where the state and federal government drew it. And then this takes in a neighborhood that for a long time it was called Mount Jefferson. It has some civic group, it doesn't anymore. But this was the St. Elmo and Hume, right? So there were 4 developments that were built by these brothers from, I think we're from Florida. And then on the west, it's just essentially almost to Route 1 along the Greenway. And then it encompasses all the residential properties in that aforementioned St. Elmo development. One thing people need to understand is that these commercial properties on Mount Vernon Avenue, which we all love and value because they provide a wonderful array of small businesses that don't exist anywhere else in Northern Virginia, most of those buildings are contributing, what are called contributing properties to the district. And they are just as vulnerable as a house to being demolished tomorrow. In fact, some of those blocks that were in places that house businesses you love, like the butcher and cheese steak, they're on the market right now. And under the current city laws, the developer could file a grading plan, it's a DRCA grading plan, and they could go in next week, bulldozers knock it all down, and they wouldn't come to the Delray Citizens Association and say, what do you think about it? As they might if they were, you know, rezoning part of the community. They would just knock it down, and we have no recourse. Something we'll explore today is whether or not people think we should have some recourse, as do citizens who live in Old Town and Parker Gray. That can't happen. The place next door to them cannot be ripped down, demolished, without a public hearing. And sometimes things do get ripped down because they deserve to be ripped down. They're not in good shape anymore. But at least the public has some right input. So does that answer quick with the boundaries? Yeah.
Yeah, hey, Rob, what determined the boundaries? And I'm looking at a couple, like a regular shape, like who decided on that? Like the HHS, the old building is excluded?
I wanted to cover that.
Yeah, legal cover, but essentially the boundaries were set by the guys who laid out the subdivisions. And the subdivisions were laid out before you had HHS building or even a school. Mount Vernon Avenue, just a little piece of history here. Mount Vernon Avenue is called Mount Vernon Avenue because it was a competition in the late 1890s by the Corps of managed by the Corps of Engineers to create a grand boulevard from Washington to Mount Vernon. And we were one of the routes. However, they chose the Parkway route. And so Mount Vernon Avenue never really became what it was meant to be, but that's where it got its name. Who else? Yes.
So I just got a question. So what's needed? Do you know what the process is to create the overlay that does the actual protection, the zoning overlay?
Well, yeah, we have a step. We have generally have a staff member from the city planning department here, Tony Laco's, going to talk about that. But it's community driven. It's based upon some evidence. The city wants that a majority of property owners in the district want something else to happen. And there's a range of protections. There's the strictest kind of protection that Old Town has in Parker Gray. We hear people joke about, well, I can't paint my shutters yellow because that's not what we're looking at here. What we're thinking about in the committee is the creation of what they call a conservation overlay district. And they exist in the state of Virginia and around the country. There's a handful of them in Charlottesville. They are not as strict as what Old Town has, but they're also not as permissive as having nothing. The basic protection is you can't tear down a contributing building to a historic district without a public review. And that means the city staff have to write about it, send it to a commission, a board of architects review, and have them make a judgment about it. And that would give people a voice. So that's sort of the basic protection to look at. But there are levels you can go through. A conservation overlay district at its heart is about protecting sort of the whole streetscape, sense of scale of buildings, that things fit in. That if you have, right now, in the current zoning, single-family homes have a setback requirement of maybe 15 feet, 20 feet? 25? Thank you. Do you maintain that to keep the sense of streetscape and scale? So essentially maintain a front yard. So there are all kinds of details in the weeds that we would have to talk about once we had some sense of clear direction from the population of Delray, or particularly down Potomac, that they want something done to not wake up next week and see a sign in front of the next door neighbor's house that's being torn down. So it's yet we don't know, but there are all kinds of ways to do it. It doesn't have to be the Old Town model. I don't think anybody in this room, including myself, would support that. Yeah, Lisa.
Can you talk about, as it stands today, what the protection or lack thereof of protection of the town of Potomac is, just so everybody's clear?
We have no protection from the city of Alexandria. And that's something that the city, can wrestle with if they want to. I have to tell you, when the district was created in 1991, we had enthusiastic support from the city council, from the mayor at the time, from the planning director, from the city manager, Walt Lawson. They gave us money to pay these students from Virginia Tech to do the survey. We put in from our own treasury about $5,000, and we got a grant from the Historic Housing Foundation, additional money to help pay these students to do the survey, because that's sort of the basis of proposing a district. You need to know what you got in the boundary. So there's no protection now at all. As I said, any contributing property. And when the district was created in '92, there were 690 contributing buildings, and that would include the bank across from Cotton Miller Square. It would include the Coliseum Center. Yes, anyway, not to mention all kinds of houses. But that 690 number now is not quite determinative because a lot of things are being torn down. And most of you can probably tell your own experience of seeing that happen. So the number is shrinking. The question is, how long does it shrink before the state says, you're no longer a district? You let it go. Now this could change a little bit, I think, because the city's going to get a new planning director. The previous person in the job had no interest in this issue. He was contacted by President Virginia in 2023 to say, hey, should we want to work on something here? And they didn't want to do it. So, yeah.
Hi. I want, for those of you who have the frequently asked questions, at the very bottom it says, the city is not considered a local historic district here and therefore contributing structures can be demolished without city review or input from neighbors. Just to be clear, if I read that I didn't know much about it, I would think that the city was not interested. The city would not consider a district conservation or historic overlay unless there was support from the people who live here. My name's Carol Black. I'm on the Historic Alexandria Resources Commission. This is my colleague, Gail Rothrock. We are interested in historic preservation of the entire city of Alexandria, but I actually live here. So what Rod's saying is not wrong. It's just the fact that it's not completely clear that, yeah, there's a conservation overlay, and then there's also the historic overlay like Parker Gray and Old Town, where there is more protection. So Tony Nicole, I'm sure, will kind of explain the difference, but there has to be support from the neighbors. So just to kind of, we'll shed a little more light on that. Thank you, Rod.
Thanks, Carol. Just one difference between now and 35 years ago, the city at that time did not demand that we do a survey or a poll of residents. They heard from the Delray Citizens Association, they heard from the expert at Virginia Tech Architecture School that this might be a good idea. And at the time, because of the more meager economic success of Delray as a community, the city manager and the planning director knew that historic preservation is an economic driver. And that if we put that in place, it would raise property values, therefore bring in taxes. It would, by providing that sense of place, it supports efforts by our association and the business association to establish this community that has special events that people come from all over the metropolitan area to attend. And so the city knew that the district would create that. The question is now, the motivation for the city on economic grounds to do something for Delray is not so great because we're pretty successful, right?
Well, again, not to argue with you, but the city has been approached and has, talk to people who live here about what type of district they want to have, if they did want to have one. I don't get any indication that the city is against these things, but there has to be public support for it.
Of course. Yeah. And then we'll work on that as we move ahead. Yes, Ms.
You talked about how when the historic, like when the district was created and the small area plan was put in place, there was a reduction in the height limit.
Yeah.
What was the sort of interplay between creating the small area plan? Like, why was the height limit an important issue? Was there a fear that there would be bigger buildings built? Were there already buildings that met the higher height limit?
Right down. It used to be called the Calvert Building. I think now it's called Delray Tower. That was built under the previous zoning. And frankly, at the time, as people were moving in here, paying what seemed at the time like a lot of money for their houses, wanted to fix them up, raise a family, live in a small town, they didn't want to see more of those. Now, what was interesting about that down zoning, think about it. Think of the property value that was taken away in a heartbeat just by, ink on a page. Not a single property owner or developer sued the city challenging the small area plan. It's pretty remarkable. Why? Because the Delray Business Association and the realty community supported it. Part of that was because they knew the disruption of building large, more Delray towers along the, think how disruptive that would be. It would take a year or 2 or 3 maybe to do that. There'd be no Halloween parade, there'd be no Harley Avenue. I mean, the goose has kind of laid a golden egg here. The question is, do you want to break the egg? So that was part of the city's calculation, I think, by supporting the reduction in the height, but it wasn't controversial at all. It's never been revisited.
Well, it has been, and zoning has participated in that, and actually pushed to have higher building heights allowable along Mount Vernon Avenue, among other places. And that was defeated. That was stricken from the markups of the new ordinance, because of public distress about the idea of 75-foot buildings along Mount Vernon Avenue, where you were used to 45, but nobody even builds to that height typically. The buildings have sort of been done. This area, I'm going to be a speaker.
Yeah,
so
Paul,
I'm sorry.
Paul, save yourself for your time. Sean, you have a question?
I'm just curious, in moving ahead with preservation, I mean, it's clear that you have to have community support. I don't really know how you document that support moving forward, so you can, is it a vote or a plebiscite, or, I don't know.
Well, this is a good question, because it's never been done before. It was not demanded of the Old Town residents when we created the Old Historic District. It was not demanded of the Park and Ray residents when that just was created. This is a sort of new hoop for us to jump through, and I think we can jump through it. The question is, who's the arbiter of what public sentiment is now? I've spoken to the president of the Historic Alexandria Foundation, which has been very supportive of this district in the past. They've given us 2 grants over the past 35 years to help preserve it. You could do a hire polling firm, do a survey. I mean, I would think if the city actually wants a survey done that gives them evidence, they should probably pay for it themselves. But I mean, I'm happy to try to raise money from the nonprofit community to help them do that, but I don't think we should look at it as an instrumental roadblock. There are ways to do it.
But I guess my question is, we don't know, I mean, people wouldn't really necessarily know what they were supporting because the details are vague, and given the number of teardowns we've had and teardowns in progress and rebuild, there are a lot of people with a vested interest in not seeing anything change.
You're right, you're absolutely right, and so you'd have to, to do this right, you'd have to hire a firm that does polling, do 2 or 3 questions to give the city the sentiment. And I'd be curious myself to know what public sentiment really is. I mean, are we tilting at a windmill here, or is it worth pursuing? So we're not going to know until we go through that process, but today's workshops have explained to people what all the different elements are, what else could be done. And we're also going to hear a little bit about, let's say there's no improvement in the district at all. There are 2 tools in the city's toolbox, citizens' toolbox, to preserve, if you're interested in historic preservation for your own property. There are historic easements that the city can hold or nonprofit can hold that would encumber any, let's say, the demolition of your home after you die, if it runs with the property. And there are tax credits available that can be exercised under federal law, I think state law too. So there are things you can do in that regard.
Rod, do you think it would be helpful, we skipped over the agenda, but just in the context of some of the questions that we're getting, do you think it would be helpful to just kind of run through who's going to be here and what they're going to talk about?
Sure, okay, and then I will give it up to Lee Ness. So Lee Ness, he and his wife Janet, when the district was first created, he and Janet founded the Town of Potomac Historic Society, and in working closely with the Delaware Citizens Association, they managed the program for plaquing your building, whether it's commercial or residential. There's a plaque on the back. There's also a brochure about how you apply for a plaque. And I think we're almost out of plaques. We need to order more, probably, right? So Lee's going to talk about that. Lee has a regular, I think every other month column in Greek Del Rey. If you go to, if you walk on Mount Vernon Avenue, any of the historic markers that the city put up, those are written by Lee. Lee knows his stuff. Next, Paul DeCourt. Paul joined the historic committee. He's a longtime resident of Del Rey. He's an architect by training, and he lives in the part of Del Rey that's not in the district. And his question, like many people, is, well, what does it take to do more? Because I did send around that large map that shows in the districts. There's essentially a gap between Town of Potomac and Rosemont and Old Town that would be filled in with another district. Essentially preserving, I guess what you'd call Alexandria pre-1940. And then Tony LaColla. Tony, where are you? Not here yet. He will show up. Tony has been working with the association on and off for a couple of years, trying to puzzle out what could we do, what are the options. And he has a presentation, and I think he'll probably come more around the time he's due. Lee Perna. Lee is a longtime resident of Delray, also shares space in Greek Delray. He also does an every other column on the history of Delray, and some really interesting stuff you can learn. Lee has a varied background, but he happens to be an expert on how you do research on your house, and why that's important, what that can lead to. So look forward to hearing from Lee. And Susan Horn is a chair of a commission that most people don't even know exists. It's not the planning commission, it's not the VAR. It's a commission where the appointees are shared by both the council and the governor of Virginia, right? Governor. And they primarily work on accepting historic easements of the city. The other program I want to tell you about, it's available to homeowners. The city has a program you can see on the planning department's website to preserve buildings over 100 years old. And there are criteria, but essentially you can apply to have your building put on this 100-year-old list. And even if you're not in a BAR regulated district like Parker, Gray, or Old Town, you would be putting yourself under that regime, which means if you want to do something, or if someone buys your house and wants to do something to it, they are then required to go through the same process people in Old Town would go through, and that's meant to preserve the 100-year-old. What's interesting about this is that you think in a city the size of Alexandria, there would be more than, I think there are 75 or 80 buildings on that list. Now, obviously, if you're in Old Town, you're automatically on the list, but elsewhere in the city, there are very few. Because the city does not, frankly, go out of their way to have people apply, because when you apply, who makes the final decision? It's the city council. So it adds the city council's workload and the staff's workload to have to go research every 100-year-old building application. So that's one of the reasons I don't think we see a lot of that, but I think there are people here. Lee, does your house qualify under that 100-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay. So and then we're just gonna shut it off. Now, what's gonna happen after this? We have a meeting of our committee September 9th, which is next Tuesday, and you're all invited. It's open to the public. It's a Zoom meeting. We'll talk about what we learned today and what we're going to try to do next. Because our goal is to get something before the association's executive board and membership, I would hope, by the first of the year. But it can't be done quickly. It can't be done without thought. It can't be done without sort of a broad range of buy-in from people who are important players in this. Like the city, the association, the business community, and the residents. So I can answer more questions later on. It'll be great.
Just about the agenda.
Pardon me?
Question about the agenda.
Yeah.
Is someone be touching on the sample book? Is someone be touching on the sample book?
Rod, we're behind schedule.
We are behind schedule?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
like 5 minutes
The
behind schedule.
sample book's back there. Lee, come on up.
Thank you.
There is a clicker here if you want to do it, or
I'll let Lee do it.
there's a clicker here if you want to do it, or you can
Okay.
just tell me to go forward and I'll do
What
it
is
for
it, the
you.
center button?
Just the forward and back on the sides.
Okay.
Just try it and see how it works for you. I'll do it for you. How about this?
There you go.
You just tell me when.
Okay. I'm Lee Ness. I alternate columns in Greek Del Rey. I've started using Leland Ness because otherwise I start getting unwarranted praise from Lee Perna's contributions. They say, "Oh, you were great," and of course I say, "Yes, I was." Next.
All right.
I'm going to just briefly talk about the architectural development in Del Rey. Hit it. Okay. If this were 1875 or 1880, we'd be here and we'd be looking around and there would be grass as far as the eye could see. Nothing else. No trees, no nothing else. Couple of small farms here, but this land was owned by the Lloyds and they grew grass. And twice a year, they'd come with the size and cut it down, dry it, roll it up, and presto, you've got hay to feed all the horses that were in Alexandria City, which didn't have any place to graze. So this was the cash crop here, grass. And you had, running up here, surprisingly, this is Bellefonte. People look around and they say, well, it's like any other street in Delray. No, Bellefonte, I think God made Bellefonte. That's how old it is. It's always been there. You don't notice it, but it is old. And this is Mount Vernon here, Monroe, a couple of farmhouses, and the city poorhouse. The railroad, another railroad, and grass. Now, what made this so nice? If you were an entrepreneur in real estate, the land is flat. There's no trees, no nothing. You can do anything with that land you want. Next, please. And so what some of these developers did was they created developments, but not in the sense that we know developments now. Now somebody says developments and you think of Levittown or Manassas Park or some of those places leading out to the airport where you have house after house after house, garage on the left, garage on the right, garage on the left, etc. These were vacant lots they were selling. They would put down a grid of streets, rectangular grid, and they'd put down gravel, or in this area, cinder from the railroads, and they would cut it up into lots, 25 or 50 feet across, 100 feet deep, and they would sell the empty lots. That was a development. Now that's key, because it meant that all the houses were different. No matter where you'd walk down the street and you'd see different styles of houses, because everybody had a different idea of what they wanted. And over time, taste in houses evolved. Oh, good. Al's nodding his head yes instead of shaking his head no. I'm in good shape here. And so that was important, but there was a limitation. Northwest Alexandria, 1890, and then Spring Park, which morphed into Rosemont when it failed. Northwest Alexandria didn't do much, except for right up here. If you go up Monroe and you cross Russell and you have to make a little right and then you go up the hill, there's two roads off to the left and they have beautiful old big Victorians on them. And they're great, they're just fabulous. And they're dead-end streets, of course. And they were up here on the top of the hill. They could look down on Alexandria and over the river. Beautiful view. The rich people lived there because they had servants who could get in the horse and carriage and go down to Alexandria to go shopping, take the grand man to the railroad station. But if you bought a lot in here and you wanted to put up a house, you're looking around and there's nothing but grass. There is nothing there. There's no way to get to there. You're in the middle of nowhere. Then, entrepreneurs had the great idea, let's run an electric trolley line from DC down to the Mount Vernon plantation. We'll take tourists from DC down to Washington's Mount Vernon. And to do that, they ran it through Alexandria and all the way down to Mount Vernon. The right-of-way is still there. Our part of it is now Commonwealth. Ripped up the tracks, put down Commonwealth. Further south of Alexandria, it's the GW Parkway. That was the rail line. And if you go all the way down to Mount Vernon, you'll see a traffic circle down there. That's where the trains turned around. When they hit the end, they'd go around and then come back up again. And the original station and restaurant are still there, right at the traffic circle, only now it's a souvenir shop and restaurant. But this was important. They didn't do very well on the Alexandria to Mount Vernon route. However, it meant that if you had a line that ran from Alexandria up to DC, people in Alexandria could work in DC, people in DC could commute to Alexandria, and more important, anybody who had a house along that line where there was a station, they could all of a sudden now commute to DC from what had been empty grassland. The next one. And so what you had was a new sort of innovation in America, the streetcar suburb. We were one of the first interurban streetcars. And it ran down here, and that brought some resurgence to Cockroach neighborhood and the eastern part of Northwest Alexandria development. They renamed it Braddock Heights. That had a better sound than Northwest Alexandria. And in 1894, 2 new developments. The developers looked at this rail line and they said, money. They were Del Rey in here and St. Elmo here. This was bought from the Lloyd family, Wichard, I believe. This was bought from Frank Hume, and hence the name Hume Avenue. It was on Hume property originally. Next. These first generation houses that went up. People arrive and they see basically empty ground with surveyor stakes where the lots are. They look around and say, what are we going to build? We have no idea. Some of them said, I know what we're going to build. Just look 2/3 of a mile south, you've got Parker, what is now Parker Gray. You go a full 1.5 miles south, you've got Old Town. I'll bet that's what it's going to look like. So they put up row houses in Del Rey. Now, on some of these, later on, windows were cut in the side, but originally, there were no windows, obviously, not in a row house. So you still have about a half dozen of these in Del Rey, where the people put them up, the first arrivals, and they said, boy, I know what Del Rey's gonna look like. They blew it. You have 2 very nice Queen Anne Victorians. Most of you have seen those over on Windsor. They're rare. You have a lot of classic American 4 squares. That is 4 rooms on the first floor, 4 rooms on the second floor. The door is offset, so when you come in from the porch, you come right into the living room. It's a classic American design. Mom, apple pie, and the 4 square. We have a fair number of those, and they're beautiful houses. They're really nice. And in 1910, a local builder, David Rush, decided he was going to do, following the Chicago Exposition, he was going to do a colonial revival, which was big at the time. He put up maybe 8 or 10 of these. And what you'll notice with the colonial revival is strictly symmetrical. You'll notice windows. The door is centered, it has side lights. The window above the door has side lights. No ornamentation at all. Ornamentation would have been anathema. They were the opposite of Victorians. Simple, straightforward. This happens to be my house, so it's dignified like this. Now, what you then had was, this is the city in 1914, Alexandria. It's what we would now call Old Town Parker Gray. They cast covetous eyes on the land around them. They said, we want all this land here. And the Virginia Constitution at the time said a city could take land around it if it wasn't in another city, provided they went to a court and demonstrated, hey, we really need this. There was no referendum involved, the people didn't get any vote at all, and they went to court twice. They were successful in 1915 here. They annexed Rosemont And this area here up around Shooter's Hill, this they took from Arlington County, this they took from Fairfax County down to Hunter's Creek. So you had this, but what they wanted was the area up to 4 Mile Run. Now, you had the town of Potomac in here at the time, and you had some other developments, Mount Ida. The town didn't care much about those. Residents cost money. Residents are a money suck for city government. They take out in services more than they pay in. The difference has to be made up in commercial real estate. That's where they make up the difference. And right here, Potomac Yard. A lot of value there for real estate taxes. There were business taxes that could come in, and no residents. No pesky residents that you have to build schools for, or put in sewers for, anything else. It's just money. So this is what they wanted. They tried to take it, and in 1915 the court said, no, we really don't think you need it that badly. And they said no. So developments continued because of the electric railway, which ran up here. The original ones, Northwest Alexandria, Park Addition, running along Alexandria Avenue, Delray, St. Elmo. Then Mr. Groves got in on the act in 1908 with Mount Ida. But it's a beautiful, he didn't put up the houses, but beautiful houses were put up there. And our boy David Rust went to Delray too. He got this little piece that hadn't been included in the original Delray. He bought that from the Lloyds. And if you walk along Bellefonte, which is the southern boundary, if you're walking this way and you look to your right in this last block before Commonwealth, you'll see a number of the houses that look similar. They're not identical, but they're similar. And the reason is David Rust put them all up at the same time. He was an early Levitt, although his houses were nicer. But if you walk along there, it's really interesting. You walk along there and say, yeah, that looks sort of like that one, sort of like that one. And so he was an early developer in the modern sense. Now, what you then had was, this is the old racetrack here. It went through a lot of uses. The Army even used it for a while. They used it during World War I for an artillery battalion that was forming. Finally, the owners gave up in 1921. They said, we're not getting it. And they sold it to developers. And so you had in here, 1922, and I did walking tours of Delray back 30 years ago. And you could start in the Delray development and walk north. And the difference was stark once you crossed Mount Ida. In here, you have the four squares, and mostly four squares and some unrowed row houses and assorted other older style houses. And you cross here, and all of a sudden, it's bungalow heaven. And you look down these roads, and it's bungalows on both sides, because that was what was in vogue in the 1920s. You do see some bungalows in Delray and St. Elmo for infill. But what you're mostly seeing is was a dramatic shift when you went from Delray, just crossed Mount Ida, and you see a dramatic shift in architecture. That's not the case. That's not so much the case anymore. So many of the houses have been torn down, or they've been expanded and encapsulated. And so if you go from here to here, you're walking down, you say, oh, that's a nice old four square, and a McMansion, and a McMansion. And you cross, and you say, oh, there's a bungalow, and a McMansion, and a McMansion. There is still, you can still see some differences, but they are fading as the older houses are torn down. Let's do another one. These are the second generation houses. These are the ones that went up starting around 1920 with the second generation of developments. And as I said, these were sold as empty lots, so the owners put up whatever they wanted and whatever was in fashion at the time. And one of my favorites, that's a beautiful house. That's a bungalow, and it's gorgeous. These became popular in the 1920s. You also had a sort of an enlarged version of the four-square, but you'll notice that it has taken some pieces, some bits, from the arts and crafts movement that inspired that, and you can see it there. You can see it in those pillars there. That's arts and crafts. And so it's a little larger than your basic four-square, but you can still see the arts and crafts touches in these second generation houses. And then when you get into the 1930s, tastes changed again, and you get into the Cape Cods, which are also nicely proportioned. They're nice houses. Now, I'm just going to show you here the house values by neighborhood in 1915. And what you can see is that in 1915, these were not well developed. They were not densely developed. 97 houses on 494 plots. Now, a plot was usually considered 2 lots to make 50 by 100. And Cottage Park was dense. St. Elmo, no. Mostly they're at about half. But Northwest Alexandria. And you can see the average house value. For reference, Rosemont, which had just been annexed, way above what poor Del Rey had. You look in here, these are the po folk. This is blue collar. You go to Rosemont and you look at the ownership in Rosemont, and it has names like Worthing and Burke and Herbert and names like that. I mean, whole fish. I mean, really. That's what you get in Rosemont. You do not get it in our poor little area here. Okay? Now, what did you get for that amount of money? Here's 1926. This house was assessed at $500. As you can see, this is an unrowed row house. And this still stands. It's, I think, Windsor down by US 1. I wrote it up on my webpage because it's so beautiful. Now, Northwest Alexandria, you get this. It's also, that's a beautiful house. I like that. And finally, this was assessed at $2,000. Now, you'd say, this house is not worth twice that. And you're right. But the county had their version of California's Prop 13. When you build up your house, they give you an assessed value, and it stays that way. It doesn't, there's no inflation on the value of your house. This house was put up and it was assessed at $500, and by golly, 20 years later, it's still assessed at $500. Now, they did do a minor reassessment in 1915 when people said, this is ridiculous. But when you see the house values, what you're looking at is not only the quality of the house, but its age. They didn't update the assessed value. Do we have any city officials in here? That would make a lovely idea. I would love to have my house assessed when I bought it 30 years ago. These are the 1926 assessed values. And here we are in 1926, and once again, houses and plots. You can see they're starting to fill out there at about half. In St. Elmo, Del Rey is about half full. And the value increases. And what's striking is the variation in values. You'll notice that while for instance, St. Elmo and Del Rey aren't particularly high in average value. Look at the maximum. There was, if you go to St. Elmo, there was at least one house valued at $4,000. In Del Rey, there was at least one house valued at $3,500. Compare that with the high values elsewhere. Emma Hume has a higher average, but the biggest house isn't worth that. You have to go up to Mount Ida to tie it, Rosecrest, which I love, and Northwest, of course, you have the 6,000, which are those big Victorians up on the hill. The rest of Northwest Alexandria wasn't that rich. But that's the interesting thing here, is the variation in house values, which tells you that there was a lot of variation in the houses themselves, in the age, in the size, in the style. These were not homogeneous developments like you would see today. Now, this is, I believe, is my final slide. This answers a question that was asked earlier. The town of Potomac is this red area here. It ran from US 1 over to Commonwealth, Bellefonte in the south, and Glebe in the north. Now, when they set out to create a historic district, they realized that the feds don't want to hear a historic district where you walked in the street and you say, oh, there's a nice old Victorian, now ignore these houses, this house, and on the next block we'll see a nice Cape Cod. That's not a historic district. Not, oh, there's a nice house here and there's a nice house 2 blocks over. That may be nice houses, but it's not a historic district. It gives you the feel of a historic district. So what they had to do was to get clever. They took this map here, and they took an X-Acto knife, and they cut away portions of the town of Potomac that offended them. Now, for the largest one, of course, was the Oakville section. That had been set up by Emma Hume, in 1906, and it failed, because there were no road connections anywhere else except to US 1. And by the 1950s and 60s, it was warehouses and light industrial. I liked the old warehouses. I thought they were cool, but they're gone. Now it's the Inova Health Center, and there's apartments and condos there, and founding fathers. So they had to cut this area out. Then there were the new stores along US 1. They had to go. So they cut them out. And then they went away. Is this Auburn Village, maybe? I'm not sure. But they cut this out. And then up here, of course, you have the lube place and the car wash. And so they had to cut those out. And you go down here and you have the school. That used to be a beautiful 1908 schoolhouse. Gorgeous, with the pillars and the, oh, he's nodding his head, yes. Gorgeous place, but the problem was it really looked good. So they tore it down and replaced it with Mount Vernon Community School. So they had to cut this away, having torn down the schoolhouse. And there were some apartments along here. And so what they did was they basically cut away all the parts of the town of Potomac that wouldn't contribute. Now, the National Park Service does not have a minimum standard of what percentage of the houses have to be contributing structures. There is no magic number, but it does have to be substantial. You have to be able to walk down there and say, oh yes, now I see what this place looked like. And so they had to cut all of this away because you couldn't do that there. And as Ron has pointed out, every time a house gets torn down, an old house gets torn down and replaced with a new one, we get closer and closer to whatever that threshold is that the National Park Service has. Now, I asked the former head of the National Park Service district survey people, I said, have you ever pulled a historic district designation away? And he said, no, but we've thought about it. Okay, so you can see what they did there, and what Paul is going to talk about is perhaps expanding or doing another set of historic districts outside, mostly to Mount Ida is beautiful, Rosecrest is gorgeous, you have some beautiful houses down here. It is really, really nice. And in fact, I think some of these areas are better preserved than the historic district. So that is where we stand on this. And does anybody have any quick questions? Because we don't want to run well over. Did I answer everybody's question? And everybody heard me? I've never had anybody say, Sergeant Ness, I didn't hear you. Yeah.
You talk about transportation being an impediment to the development of the development.
Initially.
But what about water? Where was the water source for those homes?
Springs.
Wells. My house has a well.
What?
My house has a well.
Well, yeah.
Wells and outhouses.
So, any other questions?
I have a story about a spring.
Thanks, Lee. You're terrific. It's a great resource for our community and our association. He mentioned percentage of buildings that need to contribute. There is no hard number, but when we district was created, there were 690 contributing properties out of roughly 900 buildings. So a substantial number of buildings. Time out. Paul, you're on. She does.
Yeah, I'm good, and I put the map in here too.
There's
so
two
you
quick
just-
facts
yeah.
about the town of Potomac that you
Do
may
you want
have
it
not thought
like
about.
really late? Is there a place where you
The
want it?
town of Potomac is still recognized by the Postal
Yeah,
Service. If you're in zip code 22301, you can put down your return address as
Oh, the one
Potomac,
with all the
Virginia, not
districts.
Alexandria. And the
This guy.
Postal Service will.
Where do you want it?
mail to you.
That one right
And that's the
Yeah, I
reason
see
post
it.
office is still called.
Oh, you want it, you want it
Station.
now?
Yeah.
Okay, Paul DeCourt.
Hi,
You've got 25 minutes.
25.
I know you can do it.
We can do
Then we're gonna
this.
take a break.
We can do this.
So I'm Paul DeCourt. I am an architect. I'm an architect forever, I guess. I'm retired, which you never not one, I guess, even though. And I've lived here for 40 years. I've lived here for 40 years.
Want to use a mic?
Yes. I've lived in the city for 40 years. Get better? And I love the city. And I traveled all over North America for a lot of those 40 years. And when I retired, I discovered this is an incredible place. I started walking every alley, every street in the city. And it's an amazing place. And I thought, but where I live is like one of the coolest neighborhoods in the city. Because you can do anything here. You can walk to a store. You can have a lawn. You can have neighbors without being too close. You can have whatever you want to have. And I started to get into the city's history, the neighborhood's history and the development, and I discovered the committee. And I said, this is great. So now I'm going to learn something. So I started learning things about where we live. And I thought, well, you know, this town of Potomac, this area, I have a pointer. Sorry. Yes, the town of Potomac is a fascinating story. And Rod and others back 35 years ago did a fabulous job of putting together the applications for the state and federal historic district nominations. So what happened to the rest of this area? And we don't want to forget Warwick Village. Now, Warwick Village has its own civic association and may or may not want to pursue historic district status. And if they should choose to work with the Del Rey Association, we would love to have them participate. I've done enough study of the area history to think that there's some benefit to that for both of us, both of the organizations, to do this together. But we're going to talk about that later. In the meantime, it is a fascinating area, and there is a spring, the Hume Spring, which was down here at the end of sort of that north end of Mount Vernon Avenue, was a place where water was available to the public because the Humes, who owned this land and bought it from Swanson Estate, I think, in the 18-somethings after the Civil War, or the war between the states, depending on where your sentiments lie, they benevolently, I suppose, provided water to the citizens down in the valley, because up on the hill of Warwick Village, Warwick was an estate. It's a whole story about that. We'll get into that later, maybe. The rest of this is, and by the way, I live down here in Brenton. All of this is, as Lee was illustrating, a neighborhood of developments by various developers, people who bought land, laid out gravel roads, which became paved roads, and then subsequently put in the water, the sewer, the electric, and all the things we enjoy today, some of which is that old, probably. Anyway, these are all developments. So my little development of Brenton, which was on the deed when we bought the house in '85, still showed Brenton as the subdivision in the old deed. And that's how you knew where you lived. But in the meantime, all these other neighborhoods, like St. Elmo and such, were joining together by virtue of the fact that streets were being paved, and you could get there. And then the businesses decided to all get together on Mount Vernon Avenue eventually, but as we know, there weren't a whole lot of them even 40 years ago, and that's really grown. So I thought, well, what about the rest of Delray? We're squeezed between 4 or 5 historic districts, certifiable historic districts, some of which have the local controls, like the Parker Gray and Old Town Historic District. But we don't need to do that. We need to be like Town of Potomac. Now, Town of Potomac is looking to pursue slightly more rigorous review authority over projects to protect and preserve the character of the neighborhood before we lose too much of the character by virtue of buildings being destroyed or demolished and replaced. So what we're talking about for the rest of, my pointer is going, the rest of the Delray, well, anyway, you get the idea, is that it should be in the historic district, or at least recognized. So I'm going to go on to, so we know the geography, right? We live here. I'm going to go.
Where do you want me to be? Do you want me to
Start
be
on my first page,
right
I
at the
guess.
beginning of your slides?
I had some things about history, and also, okay.
Right here?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
Why is the historic district important? I think it's important because of sense of community, sense of place, sense of being, belonging, neighbors, loved ones. This is where you live. And when you look around to what you live in, you think this is pretty cool. So I'd like it to be this way. We've had a lot of, as we were saying before, the high-rise buildings, which are popping up here and there. They're inevitable. That will happen. It'll happen anywhere. I've done architecture for 40 years. Some of my high-rise buildings are in cities. They're typically in cities, like dense cities, Chicago, but they're also out there in the whatever, the suburbs. When it's done well, you say, that's a nice building. When it's done intrusively, you say, Jesus, I wouldn't want to live next to that thing. So we have those concerns all the time. And we have friends or not friends, depending on their positions, for whatever reason, in places like zoning, in places like the city, which have been incredibly helpful and very enthusiastic about doing these things, as we've heard today. Now, that sentiment has changed over time. It's not maybe as enthusiastic kind of support, but I think we can get there, and I think we will get there if we want to do things like create,
Oh, it is working.
create and foster a sense of community in place, which is what we're talking about. We have a recognition for where we live, is what we're saying. So I'm going to get through this because these are things you've heard today, but these are real things, economic benefits. We already sort of enjoy that. People come to Delray to dine, believe it or not.
Can I interject something?
Yeah.
So all these slides are available. There's a QR code, piece of paper with a QR code in the back that Paul Hare made. Paul, where are you? Okay, anyway, you can pick up a QR code if you want to review these slides at your own time or send to friends. You can do that.
If there's any interest in any aspect of this, like the business side of it, the job side of it, the tourism side of it, we can always talk about these things, and I think you will eventually want to do that. And sustainability, preservation is inherently preserving. It is keeping what you've got. It doesn't mean not adding on, doesn't mean not changing. It doesn't mean it doesn't affect property rights in any way. All it says is that be mindful. Before you tear something down and replace it and use more energy and more resources to replace the stuff that's already there, it's just kind of stupid, as long as you can maintain and properly and comfortably live in an old house. My house is 90 years old. It's even older than I am. And the house is doing okay because we maintain it. If we didn't, it would be a different story. I've seen that happen. But we know these things. And if we want bigger, we can make bigger. We don't have to make it big and ugly. We can make it big and really wonderful. We can do that. So, and we have to rely also on the building community. I wrote an article, a letter about lighting. The developer builders here are responsible for doing better jobs about things that they build and understanding what they're building impacts the people next door. So we can get into that too, but we all have responsibility and we have to be able to talk to in one voice the people like the building developers who come in and just tear things down and build a new house, and you say, that's great, it looks like an old farmhouse, but that's what it replaced, an old farmhouse. So what the hell? But anyway, but it's got a deeper basement or whatever. And you say, okay, fine. But when you do that in a way that's sensitive to the neighbors. And there's a whole lecture about that I'd love to give. So again, preserving cultural heritage. You want to get at that? I think it's important. We do have a cultural heritage here. We have so many people who worked in the rail yards. Oh, that's fascinating. And they had these little houses that they bought for $700, and they had to scrape that money together to live in Del Rey. That's the way we do things, right? And those are our forebearers, and they live here. And I want to respect that. Oh, I want to go back. We have a fabulous architectural museum here. I want to say that we do live in a museum. We live in a museum because so much of it is still here. We have to recognize we still have it before we lose it. These buildings are precious. This building is fabulous. Art Deco architecture in not town of Potomac. I'm talking about in my neighborhood, down in Brooklyn. This is where that is. And so these are on Glendale, and they are the low-rise apartment buildings. And they are beautiful in their own way. Now, could they be more beautiful? Yeah. I mean, the way the landscaping is done and things like that. But the buildings themselves are sort of timeless in a sense because they, I don't know, they fill a function, they fulfill a function, they house people, and they do it in a charming way. We can always sort of imagine improvements to the built environment, and I'd love to do that because I'm an architect. But a lot of the things we have around us that haven't been torn down and replaced, like this building, replaced something that was more gorgeous. These things are keepers. They're what you want around you, I think. So, Warwick Village, real quick. Interesting history. It was a wooded lot, 250 acres or something like that. And it had, basically, it was agricultural, I guess, and woodland or whatever. It was owned by the Swan family. So I'm not aware of any development there, Lee might know. And then Hume, who was a Confederate soldier, an officer, and a spy of the other side, bought the property after the war. And he became a very successful mercantilist in D.C. And so he developed an estate there. And the house was lovely. And they used it as a summer home. It wasn't even the main home for the family. And they used it until like the 1940s. And then it was vacated and it was dilapidated and finally torn down and sold in about 1951. Warwick Village was created by developers. I don't know their history. I want to know more about that. But it is a planned community. It's one of the first in the country. A planned community that was intended to have a bucolic kind of feel of these row houses that marched up the hillside, and they're lovely. That whole layout is fabulous. And people would walk down or drive down to Delray proper, where they would go to Mount Vernon Avenue and go to the butcher shop or whatever. And so there was that connection. It was the Humes Spring that the people drank from, which started back at the time that they owned the estate. And they built a stone gazebo on Mount Vernon Avenue where people would come to get the water. That's pretty cool. I mean, and it's a shame we don't have that here anymore. But anyway, so that was, I don't want to get into it, but that's Swan property is up that away somewhere. And so this is us. My point about the Historic Preservation District. And this is really important. What we're talking about here is like living in the town of Potomac, but you wouldn't know the difference between the town of Potomac and crossing Bellefonte and being out of the town of Potomac, because all the houses kind of look the same. There's a continuity and a similarity in all these neighborhoods that make up Delray, what we now call Delray. And the Delray Citizens Association historically has encompassed all of that land area, not just the town of Potomac. And you heard the history of the town of Potomac and how it was sort of carved out to make it possible to do the nomination, the application and all, and sort of have a package. Here it is. My argument would be that they left out the rest of the package. But that's okay, because we can fix that. We would have another, because of technical reasons, another district. But think about it, we would be Old Town, Parker Gray, Greater Delray, and that is a placeholder name, which is kind of cool. Town of Potomac, Rosemont, because we are basically between all of those things. So Rosemont, Old Town, Parker Gray, Town of Potomac, and what? I mean, the rest of this is, I think, a valid subject for a historic district nomination because of the continuity of architectural context, the sort of cultural conditions of the neighborhood, the fact that so much of it still exists, the beauty of the rest of this, like this, so all of Delray, is that it still is an intact and continuing sort of museum piece of American suburban development. And the rail line, sorry, where are we? Anyway, the rail line that ran down Commonwealth over here, I'm over here somewhere. So I could have just easily walked to a station and gotten on and commuted to DC, and I probably would have, or working the rail line. Anyway, the rail yards, which were the biggest in the country, I think, at one time. Amazing. So, and that's all gone, but we have them all, so that's great. So, anyway, let me get through the slides. I'm sorry. We have the criteria. We meet the criteria. I'm just saying that if we look at the character of the neighborhood and the architectural style and the methods of construction, there's a history. Basically, we're talking about 50 or 60 years of American history. From the time they built the railroad and they carved out these neighborhoods in 1894, those are dates that are on the map, in the north and in the south. So basically, Delray is getting infilled by the population demands and job opportunities and whatever of Alexandria and DC. Did I get that right? Alexandria and DC. And so the rail is what kicked all this off. We are one of the first electric railroad commuter suburbs in the country, if not in the world. So as we do more research, and by the way, all of this bears research. We're going to have to do the same they did 35 years ago and take pictures of all the houses. The technology now will help us. We might be doing this on tablets. We might, so volunteers, step forward. We might have to hire some people, and we'll talk about getting money from the city somehow. But as we learn about every building, and we have this full picture of where we live, I think we're going to be even more fascinated. And we're also going to confirm the suspicion I have that we do have sort of a shared history from the beginning of the last century until about 1950s-ish. And all the rest of the stuff in between is sort of infill. And the styles, it doesn't matter, they're a little different here and there. There's a building almost a building code kind of history that we represent. We had the big houses or the smaller houses, the bungalows, the four squares being built on private lots. And then developers came and built several houses. Our builder built several similar looking, based on Cape Cod style brick houses. So it went from wood to brick. This is in 1936, so in the height of the Depression. Something's going on. There's a story about the builder. I'm not going to tell it here, but he did kill himself. And the point is that you learn these things, if you moved here 40 years ago, from the people who lived here and who were already in their 80s and told you stories about how, oh, that was all cornfield. And there was a creek right behind us, which is now the alley. And I heard this from George Penn. I was so lucky to hear stories from my neighbors who told me about things that happened now 100 years ago. They built, George and Loretta built a house next door to ours, the second house on the block, and they built it in 1927. They had it built and bought from the builder a beautiful little bungalow, which stayed that way until the 80s or 90s when it was enlarged, sensitively enough. But the point is that people live here, and there's history. Anyway, I'm getting lost. Time to wrap up. Yep, it's time to wrap up. Sorry. Anyway, tax credits and easements you're going to hear more about, and these are all pertinent to properties that exist in a historic district if they are contributing properties, and you're going to learn a lot about that. Oh, these are the best parts. These are the pictures. So I do have slides here from some of the homes in Warwick Village because they're very cool. I also have slides here of houses that are very late arrival in the neighborhood, into the like 60s. Sort of up on the hill, sort of Ashby or whatever. I walk these streets, but I'm pretty sure of the boundaries. I kind of blends. Anyway, and then these houses are spectacular. You can buy a house of any size, and you can't get one for less than $1 million anymore here, but you can buy one. These tiny little houses are great, and some of the big houses are fabulous. Anyway, so this is not what we are doing with the town of Potomac. This is not the overlay. This is a totally separate project, which is going to take, I don't know how long, to assemble all the data required to make applications, to go to the feds, through the support and resources and the sort of contribution of the State Department of Historic Resources, Commonwealth, Department of Historic Resources, to support the effort to go through with this. Now, we need to, first of all, the board of directors of the Citizens Association needs to approve this, and we keep working on it. There have been two of us really doing this homework. John is not here today. His daughter is starring in a soccer game. But in the meantime, so I'm carrying the baton for both. In the meantime, I just want you to think about where you live. If you don't live in the town of Potomac, if you're already there, you sort of have, maybe even a sense of protection that people care about this enough to add a little layer. But we live in an area, many of us, who are outside that sort of zone of recognition. It's just about, well, this is a historic area. So I'm convinced it is. I've done a lot of research myself, and I just need other people to sort of chime in and say, yeah, you're right. So that would be great. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Great. Okay, we are back on schedule.
Can I say something?
Sure. Yes.
I'm Amy Anda,
Stand up.
I'm Amy Anda, I'm the president of the Warwick Village Citizens Association. We are going to explore this fall. We have a very common history, as you heard. Amongst other things, we are the Hume summer state, the party state. That's why I say we have a great time in Warwick Village. And all built by the same developer, originally rentals, then bought. Similarly, I think we follow some of the same history, like Park Fairfax and Fairlington, which are historic districts. So we look forward to exploring this as a community, and then also working with DRCA to explore, whether there's interest in a historic district, whether it is a separate, joint. At the end of the day, I think as this exploration happens in all ends, that we work together and learn. learn together, so more to come.
Thanks, Amy. Yes.
I'm hoping someone from the organizer of this workshop can help me out, not necessarily the last speaker, and clarify. There are 2 projects on the table, because there's been these random presentations and no one has given me a, maybe I'm the only one in the room confused.
No, you're not.
No, there are 2 potential efforts here. One would be to further protect the existing district from losing contributing properties. The second is addressing a question people have had since 1992. Well, how come it's just this area? What about the rest? It looks the same. It's the same architecture. Sometimes the same builders. So the second thing, and that was what Paul just discussed, once again, when we want to do this, you'd have to have volunteers to survey the buildings, write them up, create a narrative to propose why it qualifies at the state and federal level, and hopefully you want the support of the city as well. So that's a separate project. In my estimation, it will take a couple of years to do that, but this is sort of the first discussion of it. Yes?
If the future, so I was just curious about the timeline, because I lived in the neighborhood not for very long, and I can say in like the last 7 years that I've lived here, I live at Delray in Mount Ida. I have seen 3 tear downs and like expansions on the homes and stuff, and I bought into the neighborhood for all the reasons we all live here. And I guess my concern is the timeline that you're talking about. Like it could take 2 years to do the first phase and then 2 years to do the actual application process and the surveys, and then we have to file. And then in the meantime, I've had 5 other tear downs and McMansions built like right in my little neighborhood. Like, is there like a way to streamline this? Like, what are you looking for in terms of help from the community? What I can do to help make it go quicker?
Well, I mean at its root, I mean, that sort of decision is a political one. I mean, one thing the city could do if it wanted to would be pass an emergency ordinance saying you can. Yeah. Pardon me?
I don't work for the city.
I want to answer a question. An ordinance that would say, for the time being, we're not going to let anything be torn down in this district without a public review while the process plays out for doing more. I mean, that's because you're right. I mean, if there were something on the table to restrict demolitions, it's possible that builders would race to the city hall to tear buildings down. That's the risk you take, Carol.
Okay, I don't work for the city, I'm a volunteer in the city commission, but the one thing I think really people need to understand, if I were looking at this, I'd be so confused about what's the difference between a historic district and an overlay, and what's the difference between conservation and historic overlay. I think when we get to the person who's going to speak for the city, we need to ask them those questions, because it's not an A or B. It's not like do nothing or have conservation. It's do nothing, have a conservation, or have an historic overlay. Yes, there's pros and cons in terms of the responsibility you have as a homeowner if you actually have the district as you do as Parker Gray or the old historic district. But the thing of it is that I don't know if there's a way to streamline it in terms of there's maybe a public movement that people maybe were asked to see to do a survey to speak, to have someone explain all this. And the one thing no one's talking about is that what surprised me is how many one-story buildings are now being made into 2-story buildings. And I want to ask Tony LaCola, because Carl Moritz told me himself, when I moved away for 4 years and came back, I know all of you have noticed how many houses now are taking up so much of the lot, and I shouldn't disparage this, but I'm going to. Across the street is what I can't look at because I'll be like Lot's wife and turn into a pillar of salt. This is happening in terms of the amount of the ground that's open that can absorb the water, because we know the flooding issues we have in this area. So someone needs to find out. Carl Moritz says that we made a little change in the FAR, it's called the floor-area ratio, how much the building can take on the size of the lot. The sight of having a big yard is like almost non-existent anymore, and those McMansions are taking up like all but like 2 or 3 feet around. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. So there's an A, B, or C. So there's an A, B, or C. There's 3 choices.
I need to clarify something.
I want to stick to the schedule. We're on a break now.
Let me clarify something, because the question I don't think is clear yet. There are 2 projects. The first having to do with the town of Potomac only. Let's say only. The town of Potomac already exists as a historic district. what is being contemplated is some sort of overlay restrictions on building, which may be some kind of a review process before you can do anything with a property. I'm greatly, that is hypothetical. That's the kind of thing you might consider for the town of Potomac. It already is a historic district. There's nothing that needs to be done to change that. These restrictions that might be in place, and I hate to use the word restrictions, but they would be a local level. The city would have to engage in that. There would have to be an ordinance written, like BAR, but light, different. For the rest of Delray that I've been illustrating, that is to make that a historic district, that will be the first time it is recognized as a district of historical importance.
Okay.
But it would have its own name because it can't be tied on, it can't be connected to the town of Potomac at this time, okay?
And it
So
might
is,
not be one district, it might be two
Paul.
districts.
so it is a separate project to answer the
Paul.
lady's question. Yes,
We're on a 10-minute break now. People can go check their phones, use the restrooms, get a drink of water.
Be back at what time?
We'll be back in 10 minutes, that'll be 11:47. And then we're gonna hear from Tony LaCola. Tony, you here?
Please, I'm desperate because all the records that have come
Tony.
disappeared. LBA doesn't have those.
I meant to point out that we have this wonderful resource. Dave McClure also goes by Delray Dave, who's doing this audio-visual record for us.
You can call me Greater Delray.
Greater Delray Dave. But this will be available on our website for people who weren't able to attend. Our next speaker is Tony Cole, the City's Planning Department. He has been sort of consulting with us on and off for a number of years about what we can do in response to this phenomenon of having buildings destroyed almost now on a weekly or monthly basis.
Make sure you can
And what sort of what the city may do about that. So Tony's given us sort of a Chinese menu of things that could be done. Spanning from nothing to the Old Town model or something in between if we want to do something to sort of preserve more of the buildings that make up our district. So Tony, come on up here. Thanks for coming.
I do have a PowerPoint presentation which I sent.
I think it's in here, and in theory, that clicker that's sitting there should let you run it, and if it doesn't, if you just go forward, I think you should see the first slide of your thing. And if you don't, I can go forward and do that. Let's see.
There we go.
That look familiar?
Yep, that's
Fabulous.
it. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tony LaCola. I'm the Division Chief for Land Use Services with Planning and Zoning. Land Use Services encompasses preservation, zoning inspections, as well as non-development cases like special use permitting. So we have a very wide array of services that we provide the city. I oversee the historic preservation staff, which is more or less involved with Olden Historic District, Parker Gray, and the 100-year-old building list. I was invited here today to present some options. I've been working with Rod for a few years. During COVID, we put together a list of potential preservation options for the neighborhood to consider. And one thing that I kept stressing to Rod was that if we want to move forward with anything, we have to see community support. So just keep that in mind. Also, City Council would have to add it to their work plan, and funding would have to be dedicated. I did leave some flyers on the back table about the preservation options available, estimated costs, how much staffing would be required to do that particular type of option. So I will go through. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me, and I will try to answer them. I am not a historic preservation specialist. While I oversee the historic preservation department, I know enough to be dangerous, but I am not an expert, okay? That's okay. So, I mean, you've probably already seen this map, you're familiar with it. The town of Potomac is on the left, and then the Delray neighborhood is on the right. The town of Potomac was added to the National Register in 1992. Often we do get calls saying, you know, town of Potomac, this home is in the National Register Historic District. Why aren't you guys preserving it? Well, we don't have the authority. Even though there's a national designation that this is a historic district, to protect and preserve particular structures, it would have to be within a local historic district. So at the federal level, there's not a lot we can do. The federal government has recognized this particular area as an area of significance, and one that should be preserved if at all possible. I will say through time there are demolitions, fires, rehabilitations, renovations that remove some of the historically recognized properties. So through time, town of Potomac has been losing some of the historic fabric in the neighborhood. And I'll go through some of those numbers in the next slide. There we go. So just a little bit about the current status of town of Potomac and Delray in general. In 2015, the city created a Delray pattern book to illustrate how new homes, additions and alterations could be done in character. This does come in very handy when someone wants to do a renovation on their property, or say for instance there's a tear down and a rebuild. We encourage the developers to use the pattern book. And we have been pretty successful. You're not required to use the pattern book, but most of the developers will use at least elements from it, so that whatever they're building has some architectural character that's similar to the neighborhood or neighboring properties. The Delray Community Association hired a consultant to update the National Register nominations, which was submitted to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. In 2020, our staff walked the district and we confirmed and adjusted the submission. And what we found in 2020, between 1992 and 2020, approximately 569 of the original 690 contributing structures were still contributing. And the next bullet down, the great majority of the 121 are no longer contributing, mainly because of additions and alterations. They have been so significantly altered that they are no longer considered contributing. They haven't been torn down, they're still there, but there's been significant alterations to the properties. This presentation I'm showing you is about a year old. I apologize, I haven't had time to update numbers, but as far as tear downs, what staff did is look through tear downs in the neighborhood, the entire Delray neighborhood, for 3.5 years between 2020 and mid-2023. We found there are 23 grading plans approved for the entire Delray area. So essentially 23 houses could have been built. During that period, 22 building permits were pulled and issued for construction. So it's not a huge amount of development, but you know, it does impact the neighborhood, and I'm sure you've seen homes go up. I will say many of the developers, people redeveloping their homes or adding additions to their homes, will max out their floor area ratio, which is the maximum square footage permitted. So we get a lot of complaints about that house is so big. Well, they're maxing out what's legally allowed on square footage. And in today's market, where property values are so high, it's advantageous for you to add as much square footage as possible.
Just a quick question. When was the floor area ratio expanded? Because I know in 20 years ago, you know, it was smaller than it is currently.
I can't tell you for sure.
Was it like 3 or 4 years ago?
Oh no, it's well before that. I started with the city in 2018. I think it might have been 2015. There were adjustments to floor area ratio. There are a lot of floor area ratio exclusions that can apply. So when you see a home that's constructed, I mean, there are exclusions for ADUs and exclusions for stairways and HVAC closets and stair landings. So once you start to look at the overall square footage of the house, it's bigger technically because we've got a lot of exclusions that can apply when we're calculating the maximum square footage. I'm sorry. So when we looked at the town of Potomac in particular, the smaller historic area, since 2016, one case went to hearing that was an existing contributing structure, which eventually was torn down and replaced. The other two, there were 2 cases for SUPs that were for vacant lots and 2 SUP cases for structures that were destroyed by fire. There is one special use permit case going through the process now. It goes to City Council next weekend, I believe it is, at 51 East Windsor, and that will be a tear down and rebuild of a 2-unit dwelling. And I will say the developer has used the pattern book. The structure that's being proposed is pretty attractive and it will blend in with the town of Potomac. Currently, because it's not a local historic district, we don't have the ability to stop demolitions like you would have in Bolden Historic District or in Parker Gray. There's no board to review the demolitions and say yes or no. So we can't stop it. So if someone wants to tear down a house, they have every right to do so at this point in time. But at least when they do tear down houses, like I said, most of the time developers are using the pattern book for the rebuilds. So some options for preservation. I was asked to talk about what potentially could happen. And like I said, if there's community buy-in, there's community support, City Council would definitely, consider putting something in their work plan. There is funding that has to be considered. So the first one is just the full-on local historic district, like OHAD and Parker Gray. This is regulated by the BAR, the Board of Architectural Review. One for this area would need to be created. Members would have to be nominated to that particular board. The thing is, with a BAR, a local historic district, any improvements to the exterior of the building, visible from a public right-of-way, have to be approved. So it could be replacing your door, replacing your windows, roof, anything has to be approved. Whether that's done administratively or having to go before the board, there would be a process involved. Some people who move to Old Town don't realize they're in a historic district. I don't know how. And then they make a repair on their property, the neighbor calls us and says, I don't see a permit. We have to issue a citation, and we have some angry individuals. But we try our best to let people know they're in a historic district and they have to go through a process to have any exterior work done, reviewed by our staff, or go to the full board. It depends on what it is. The board has delegated some of their authority to staff, and other things the board wants to still review themselves. So it will be, if you want to go that route, there's a lot of oversight. And it gets very specific. It's really getting into the nitty-gritty of historic preservation. And trying to maintain the properties as close to what they originally looked like as possible. So if someone wants to do a renovation of their house, our staff is going to look at what that house might have originally looked like and recommend particular windows, particular roof, particular doors, front porches, what have you, things that have been changed over time. And then try to recreate what was there originally. Yes?
Am I correct that that also opposes certain environmental improvements like solar panels on the roof?
Not necessarily. We have relaxed some of the standards to allow solar panels on roofs in Bolden Historic District. We are trying currently to get the BAR has to approve any changes in design guidelines to relax their standards slightly for windows. Double glazed, double pane windows are highly energy efficient, but they're not allowed. And a lot of property owners would like to install them. But currently that's not permitted. So things like that we're trying to make some headway on.
So just so I'm clear, if we were to do this, it would be up to our Board of Architectural Review to to decide whether that was a rule for Delray.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, so we don't have to be that strict, but we're at the mercy of the people we choose for that board.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
When establishing a historic district, a local historic district, the process can take 2 to 3 years and involves a lot of public outreach, kind of getting an idea of what citizens want, how strong the board should be, what rules and regulations should be in place. There's a lot of just talking to the community, trying to figure out what would work best. Old and historic district is very specific, whereas a historic district in this area might not be as prescriptive. So something to think about.
Just to make sure I understood that, how are BAR members appointed? Not by us, right? By the city council?
By city council,
Yeah.
yes. When a vacancy comes available, it'll be advertised and then citizens can apply and be appointed to the role.
Also, bear in mind, there's 2 historic districts in terms that require this type of board of architectural review, Parker Gray and Old Town, and they're different. Like in Parker Gray, you can put hardy plank at the side or the back. There's differences. There's not one size fits all. It's based on the general area, and so it's just not everything is exactly the same from one to the other.
Yeah. Rod was just mentioning to me, is like, when you do a local historic district, you can develop guidelines that are, more environmentally friendly. It's kind of the community's decision what they want to see and how they want the design guidelines to function. Let's move on to the next one. Neighborhood conservation districts. This one is kind of like a broader view. You're not getting into the nitty-gritty and determining what the windows look like and doors and, placement of different objects on the building. This is to preserve the neighborhood character. So you're looking kind of like more like the 10,000 foot view, I would say. You're more or less reviewing like demolitions, new construction, major additions, site development, not like the daily fixes that someone would make in their property, like replacing windows. So some of the major stuff, and how does that blend in with the neighborhood? How does the bulk, mass, height, scale, all that stuff match the character of the community? This neighborhood conservation district, typically they review demolitions, new construction, major additions, and site development. And then design criteria can be part of the zoning ordinance, rather than being a separate document altogether, as the BAR has right now for Old and Historic District and Parker Gray. These can be part of the zoning ordinance. It can be just a basic set of guidelines that someone who's redeveloping a property in that particular area needs to pay attention to. There would be a board established, and then they can delegate some responsibility to staff, or they can choose to take on all of the review responsibility on their own. And just like, any board of architecture review, they're appointed by city council. Let's see, there was one more. Where did it go?
I skipped the slide.
Demolition
Yeah,
delay.
that one?
Demolition delay ordinance. There it is. Another option would be to establish a demolition delay ordinance. More or less, this is just a waiting period. When someone wants to tear down a property, it could be a 30-day, 60-day wait period. This allows time for the property owner, city staff, neighbors, an angel investor to come along and find an option to preserve that property. It doesn't require the property be preserved, but it at least provides some time to look at other options. This is also similar to BAR's permit to demolish. There would be a board that have to review whether it's worthwhile or not. And it would also require the establishment of a local historic district. Could be the same boundaries as the National Local Historic District. So this is just looking at demolitions, not getting into, your property in particular and what you plan to do with your property, but at least it would slow the process and allow staff, the neighborhood, and property owners time to see what options might be available. Yes.
I'm looking for some clarity on the terms demolition and tear down. We had a house 5 or 6 years ago in our neighborhood. It was like a little brick structure, and it was declared inhabitable, and then they sort of tore it down, but they kept 2 walls which are completely not visible now because they're buried inside the house.
Yeah.
Is that not a demolition? It seems like a
It's
letter
not a
of the law kind of thing.
It's a loophole. It would be a demolition, not a complete demolition. So what the zoning ordinance says is you keep 2 of the first floor primary walls.
Which is what they kept.
Which is what they kept. Then it's not considered a full demolition. You can, basically say the house is still standing and whatever you're doing is just an addition to the house. So you don't have to go through the whole, maybe special use permit process, the grading plan process, all of the other fun stuff. So it's a way, I will say a loophole. That's the best way I can say.
And this type of thing would be subject to that loophole?
It could be, yes.
Thank you for the clarification. I've always been wondering about that house and why they kept those 2 walls.
That I don't know. Yes.
Does a demolition delay ordinance have the opportunity of the review board to say, no, you cannot demolish, or it's only a waiting period?
It's a waiting period. The board would say, no, let's do, have a 60-day window, 90-day window, see what we can do, but it will not stop it in, perpetuity. If you can't find someone who can preserve the property, there's no available, options to keep it, it could still come down. Yes, in the back.
It doesn't stop it, however, if someone stepped in and said, I'm willing to buy this property and develop it as blah, 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 that could resolve the issue, if someone in that waiting period does step forward.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if the person wants to do that.
If the person wants to do it. And obviously, someone owns the property, so they probably want to have fair market value for the property as well, so, something to think about. Let's see.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So, but in the middle example, the conservation overlay district, that ordinance could require review of the demolition, but with the result possibly being, no, you can't, just as in Old Town.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next one, here we go. Another option, like I mentioned before, there is a Delray neighborhood pattern book.
Which, by the way, is on the back table, if you want to take a look at it.
It's also on the DRCA website.
Yep. Some properties have to go through the special use permit process. If the property is considered, if it's smaller than what the zone allows, narrower than what the zone allows, that property has to go through a full hearing, planning commission and city council. There is an opportunity to require the pattern book be used for those particular special use permit cases. So far we've been pretty successful asking developers to use the pattern book, and they've been, most of them, been using it. But we could require that as part of the special use permit process for redevelopment of a substandard lot. Let's see what else. Yes.
The pattern book, is there any way of scoring those renovation or rebuild against the pattern book? Like a LEED certification,
That's a good idea. It's not something that we do currently, but it's something that could be considered, yeah. Interesting thought. Now, I didn't have a slide for these, but there are a couple other, options that I think, could be considered, and I think someone's gonna speak on this particular one later, is historic easements. Any property owner can work with the state to create an easement on their property so that in perpetuity the property isn't torn down. The property owner, today's property owner, can say, I want to see this property remain forever in a certain state, but they can work with the state Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and I think you have somebody speaking.
The local, I would prefer you saying something that is where I will.
Okay. There's also the opportunity to add any property to the 100-year-old building list. You can, make that request to the city. We have an application online. When your property becomes listed on the 100-year-old building property list, it is then subject to the Old and Historic District design guidelines. And then anything that's done, any work on that property has to go to the VAR. So that's always an option as well. If you care about your property, you want to see that it's preserved, once it goes on that list, it will have to go through any type of change has to go through the VAR. But we do have an application online. It can take about 3 months to get that done. There's a lot of research, a lot of background research that will have to take place. And I believe somebody, Lee, you're going to talk about research and so I won't cover all of that. Yes?
One of the things we talked about before you got here, and we talked about for a couple of years, is this idea of a survey of property owners. We can identify them. The city has a mapping system where you can get names and addresses, but what exactly does the city want here? Because this has never been asked for before by the city, pursuant to the creation of any kind of protections, not Old Town or Parker Gray or Park Fairfax or Town Potomac. And who would pay for that? Would the city decide they're going to put money in to do that? I mean, what do you require? I mean, we don't want to do like man on the street, talk to 100 people.
Yeah.
You want something more definitive, right?
I mean, the city wants to see that there's been some legwork done, like talking to property owners. Could be a survey, could be a petition. Just showing the city council that there is interest at least. And interest doesn't mean that the historic district will be created, but at least it can start the study process. Because there will be a significant amount of time involved in creating a historic district where somewhere along that line, it might be decided that this isn't appropriate for the area.
So let me just follow up the question. So you mentioned before that we've lost, the 690 contributing structures were down to 569. Would you just survey the 569, not the 690?
We would survey all of the structures, to be honest. There are structures because of age that might now be considered contributing structures. So there could be additional structures added.
Okay, but you would help us with that list of people, because you know who the property owners are.
Yeah, most likely we would hire a consultant, outside consultant to do the work. Our staff does not have the ability. We're just at capacity now. We don't have a capacity to do a property survey, so there would be a cost involved.
Would you trust us to do it as an association?
We would prefer it to be done by someone who is qualified and has the background and experience to make the best judgment. Yeah. Yes.
Tony, could you go back to the slide about requiring pattern book? Yeah.
You already did it.
I'm on it.
There you go.
So what would it take to have that go through? The Citizens Association could propose that to the planning department, and then it would go to the city council, and they would adopt, they would agree. It doesn't seem to me you need a survey of the whole community to get a required
That would
pattern book
be
use.
a simple zoning text amendment. Within the zoning ordinance, there could be some language created that says that any special use permit which takes place within these boundaries shall require use of the pattern book, essentially. It's not a complicated process.
So how do you get that started? Can you all propose it, or does it have to be from?
We would like to see the neighborhood say this is what we want. But yes, staff would help the neighborhood process that if we see support and buy-in.
Can you tell us approximately how many houses actually have to go through an SUP in the past 10 years?
It's not a lot. We do have a lot of what are considered substandard lots, meaning they're smaller than what the zone requires or they're narrower. But the vast majority comply, and you can just go through, a rebuild by right. There's no special review by city council. I'd say we process, maybe 6 to 12 special use permits for substandard lots per year.
In Delray?
Through the entire city. Yeah. So, there aren't a lot. And I will say, City Council has been questioning the need to review special use permits for substandard lots for quite a while. So we do have some text amendments that we're like studying, and one of those is perhaps making the special use permit process administrative, or maybe it just stops at planning commission. We don't know yet. That's going to happen in the spring sometime. Our focus right now for residential type text amendments is the conversions, the office building to residential conversions. That will be coming forward in November. Carol?
I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't. With the, now the approval of ADUs along with the house, and I'm sorry to keep bringing this property up, but it's so easy for us to understand it because it's right here. For the one in the corner, can you explain the process if an ADU is added like on top of this, on top of the garage next door? How does that affect the amount of the empty lot that can be covered by adding this on? And could any of that come up if we had not a full VAR for this area, but had this in-between, shall I call it, kind of situation? Because from talking to our former mayor, he told me he'd never had so many calls on his lights as he did as this property next door. And is there some, shall we say, middle ground if we didn't want, if this group and the whole neighborhood did not want to try to push for a VAR for this area? Is there some middle ground that could also try to stop that amount of empty land that's covered by the units?
A BAR is more focused on the design, not necessarily stopping what's permitted by right. And an ADU would be permitted by right. So I don't think the BAR, if there was some BAR in this area, could say no, but they'll look at the design of it and make sure that it fits the character of the neighborhood.
What about the percentage of open land that's left?
That's all zoning regulations. It would have to be, whatever is being developed has to comply with the current zoning regulations. Most properties require a certain percentage of the property to be open space, somewhere between 25, 35, 40%. So as long as the property has the adequate open space, you can continue to build up to the maximum height allowed. Some districts it's 25, 35, 45 feet, it just depends on the area.
Okay, so in this situation, the fact that each of the garages have, I guess it's assumed it's a rental unit, but they have a unit on top of it. Since that did not change the amount of open space, there is no change in there?
None.
So, but that's the kind of thing that may be trying to talk to the people on council, but maybe that could be changed. Because that's why you've got so much square footage on a lot, where it used to might just have a small garage or a shed. Now you've also got living unit on top of it.
Yeah, we also have a 350 square foot exemption for ADUs against FAR. So that's like bonus FAR given to property owners if they'd like to build an ADU.
Time for two more questions for the next speaker.
When you were talking about the 100-year-old building list and the design guidelines applying to that, you said anything you do to the building would have to be reviewed?
Anything visible from a public right-of-way will have to be.
I thought that was important clarification.
Yes. Ma'am?
So am I understanding that the effort, should we want to have more protection, could require the thing we're talking about, which is increasing the historic designation, like upping it a rank or two, also addressing zoning issues, which would be a separate effort, because if you're talking about like there's an empty lot and they want to develop it or whatever, it sounds like there's two wholly different governing bodies that we'd have to be addressing. Is that correct?
I mean, essentially it's kind of like choosing your own adventure. There's some type of board established. One might have authority over anything that happens with the building, current building, or new buildings. There might be a second level, the conservation, which is just looking at new construction or additions. It's kind of like picking what works best for this area. Not everybody might want to have to go to a BAR to replace their windows or doors or, a roof. But there might be a desire to at least control more what new construction or additions look like. Yes.
Can a conservation overlay have added zoning requirements?
Yes, it can, yeah. That's all part of the zoning ordinance. You can add in specific development requirements.
Tony, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We talked about this. There are a lot of city employees who would take up time on their Saturday afternoon to come talk to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have two more speakers. The next speaker is Lee Perna. Lee, a lot of you know, he lives in the community, and he is the CEO of Potomac Information Collection Services. His specialty is historic research, and that's one reason why he does this every month column for Great Delray. Anyway, Lee, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Tell us what we need to know.
All right, so I'm the other Lee involved in the historic research. And so a little bit about myself, kind of a side hobby company. I do historic research and have researched many buildings in Delray and Old Town. So I've been through the process and found a few pitfalls along the way that I'm here to share. So first of all, why research your building? Well, first of all, it's really cool to know the history. But also, if you have to present to a bar or present to zoning board or somewhere like that, you're going to want to present the history. Historic preservation credits from Virginia on your taxes. Historic easements, if you choose to go that route. You're going to need the history for that stuff. So the first place I usually go is the city's real estate assessment page. That will give you, in addition to information about the tax on the house, give you the current owner, the last owner, yeah, just leave it here for now.
Okay, perfect.
Current owner, last owner, and the date of construction. And in Delray, the date of construction is invariably wrong.
Yep.
The reason being, Delray was annexed into Alexandria from Arlington on January 1st, 1930. Some people in the town of Potomac objected to that, and the town records mysteriously perished in a fire at midnight on that day. So the city inherited the district with no records. And they just poked in something, placeholders, that are often wrong. So the next place I go is the courthouse has deed records. And with a deed record, you have a grantor and a grantee. So you as owner of the house would be the grantee. You can find the deed from when you bought it. And the deed will list who the grantor is. Then you go to the index, look up the grantor in the grantee index, and just go back. Sometimes, many times, the deed will have a little cheat in it where it says, this property was sold by John Smith, who owned it per deed book 057, page 403. Now I just go to that deed book and look at that page, since I know where it is. I can skip the indexes. Trace that back until you have the whole history. Two problems with that. One, I researched a house, same family, 150 years. One time, the wife inherited from a grandmother. So the last name, huge gap, last names were different. There was no deed transfer record because it was an inheritance. That's where sometimes knowing the family tree of the people helps. I use Ancestry.com for a lot of research in Delray, just so I know the family connections. And, oh, I can't find this person, but can I find their uncle, their aunt, their grandfather? There's that owner. There's that guy. So I find that. The other thing to remember is when you go to the Alexandria Courthouse and you get back to January 30th, 1930, they have no further records back. You have to go to the Arlington Courthouse to find anything before 1930 on Delray. So having the deed record helps you know the history of the house. Other options here. I often submit a FOIA to the city for building permits. Any and all building permits going back, it's like $10 is what they charge me to get all the building permits on a property. So you can see who put in the construction and what was done when. If you have a deed record, that will take you back to the ownership of the property, not necessarily when the house was built. As pointed out by Lee earlier, half of Delray was vacant lots for a long, long time. So when was that house built? That's when you go to the tax records. There are tax records in the special collections in Old Town. You can go back and look at, if you don't know exactly when it was built, if you don't have a record of when somebody lived here, you can go back and check the tax records to see when a house was put on a property. And if you can't find it at the special collections in Old Town, the Library of Virginia in Richmond actually has the tax books for the town of Potomac going back. Bit of a pain to get to, bit of a pain to search those records. An easier way is the library in Old Town also has city directories from 1980 going back to 1924. You can look, and many of them, 24 doesn't have a reverse directory, but many of the ones in the 30s and on have a reverse directory in the back where you can look up an address and see who lived there. And then you can go to census records and see, were they an owner or a renter? Those are other, when you can't find that deed, or even if you find the deed, was the owner the person living there or were they renting it out? Because one thing you'll find with deeds is at some point, probably some builder bought it and they owned 400 other properties in Alexandria. So it's like, which one is the next one? So sometimes you'll find stumbling blocks. Don't give up. Just keep poking at different resources. So you've got the city directories, you've got tax records, you've got, like I said, I use Ancestry.com, Washington Post historic database. As a resident of Alexandria, you are eligible for a Fairfax County library card. And the Fairfax County Library gives you access to various research databases, including the Washington Post historic database of the newspaper. Put the address in there, search it, see if anything came up. It adds to the flavor of the history as well, depending on what pops up. But I found like ads for when they were selling it, other things, discussions about what transpired, cool things that transpired at that property. The other place to look is the Library of Congress has a database called Chronicling America, which has old newspapers, including the Alexandria Gazette, all databased. Now that only goes until 1923, so that's good for earlier stuff from 1894 to 1923, but you got the Washington Post after that. There are other places, and these are just online databases. You can go to the library and search the Alexandria Gazette if you have a lead on a date or an event you're looking for. But what I do is I pull together information from a variety of places to paint the picture and fill in the gaps. And that information from the city directory may help me when I can't find that, when I have a gap in the deeds. Census records, genealogy records, really helpful, not only for understanding who owned the property, but getting a sense of who they were. Because if you want to breathe life into the history of your home, you want to know about the people who used to live there, about the people who built it, you know, and what drove that building. Sometimes you can piece together that, oh, this building was built here because that person's mother lived next door and, you know, was a widower living next door. So clearly they were, you know, there to take care of mom and stuff like that. So I'm trying to think of other resources that I'm forgetting to mention.
Use the Sanborn fire maps.
Thank you. Thank you. That's another thing I use. Sanborn fire maps. The company Sanborn created maps of communities where they drew the outline of the house and on every street and where it was on the lot and all of that. Old Town has them going back to the 1800s. The first time they were included in this part of Alexandria into the Sanborn was the 1921 map for Old Town, Alexandria. There's also a 1930s map, and back up, the 21 map is available online through the Library of Congress. The 1930s one is available in hard copy at the library, but not available through Library of Congress. The 1940s one is available at both spots. 21 is also at the library, but it's easier to go online. And then the 1940s one was updated. They would put little stickers over houses and redraw it. And it was updated into the 50s, and the library at Old Town has the updates up through the 1950s. That's great to know because when I bought my house, it didn't look like what was on the Sanborn map. It turned out the rear portion of the house had been torn down at some point. The wraparound porch had been taken off. And so that was good information that I put in my historic research when I went to the Board of Zoning Appeals to put that back. Thank you for that. I almost forgot that one. Yes?
Just maps in general help. I researched my house. I used to live on East Delray Avenue, and the name of the street changed.
Yes.
2 or 3 times, I think, or at least twice since the house was put up there. I would never been able to find it had I not had access to maps like that.
So, and that's one of the things you'll find is that the city, in its infinite wisdom, renumbered. Used to be the dividing line between East and West was Mount Vernon Avenue. But then, right around 1940, they decided Commonwealth was a better place to move it to. Don't know why. So everything got renumbered. And that's when they started, it used to be every lot had its own number. Lots were only 25 feet wide. When they renumbered, they gave every house or property its own number. And then when duplexes got built on these vacant lots, you get 308, 308A. The original numbering scheme, you wouldn't have had that. They also, to the point after the annexation in the 30s, they realized that it was creating a lot of confusion because you had a Peyton Avenue in Delray and you had a Peyton Street in Old Town, and that was just, I think the postmen got a little fed up. And so certain streets got renamed so that they weren't repetitive of streets in Old Town. And so Delray Avenue used to be Peyton Avenue. Now it's, now it got renamed 1939, I think, was it, Lee?
32.
Was it that early? Okay. It was in the 30s. Yeah. So that's a good point. Did you have a question, Sean? Or did we? You got it. Yeah. And you'll find there's lots of things, and I apologize. Some of these things have become so second nature to me, I forget to mention them. But as you research, you'll find little tidbits like that. So the deed books will be by your lot number, not by the address. The lot number is often in that tax assessment record, which is the first place I said to go look. Like you look up mine, it says, now I forget the lot numbers, but it's, Del Rey lot 145 and 146. Because 50-foot wide property is 2 lots in Del Rey. Yes?
Where's the best place to look for photos?
Photos, thank you, I was gonna bring that up. There is a dearth of photos of this area, but one really cool photo that they have in the historic collection in the Old Town Library is an aerial photo of the area labeled pre-1945. It's actually from about 1924. You can see the old racetrack starting to get developed in it. And you can see what your house looked like at that time. And see where there were houses and where there were not, and how vacant the neighborhood was. There's not a lot of houses, but again, one of the tricks I used is my Ancestry.com trick. I researched some of the former owners. I reached out and said, hey, do you have any old photos of the house? I got a picture of my porch from 1930. Somebody posed for a picture in front of the porch. Now I know what the details were like on it at that time, what the grading of the yard was.
You're still doing this kind of research, right?
I am.
If somebody here wanted your services, would they look up your company and send an email?
Yeah, and in fact, cue the website.
Here we
I want
go.
to show you a few resources.
Okay.
So if you go to Potomac ICS, you can contact me if you want, but the one company, the Information Collection Service, is the Historic Research. And on here, if you can scroll down, missives from yesteryear, you will find posted some of the great Del Rey articles I've done. If you go to the missives page, skip the first one, that's different, but this one, up a little bit more, yeah. I'm woefully behind on publishing, posting these, but I'm going to get all the articles I've written into this, into here, where you can go back and see, like, the history of Mount Ida. That'll go up here at some point. Apologize, it's not there yet. Also, if you go back to, go to the top, nope, too far. Back to here, go to the top. If you click resources, you will find a list of some of the places you can go, like the Library of Congress, the Town of Potomac Historic Association, other places, the Historic Alexandria. I've put all these up here, as well as information on historic preservation and genealogy stuff on the left. So please feel free to use this webpage to your advantage, and reach out if you have other questions. But right now, let me see if there's any questions.
And if you can't read it in the back, it's potomacics.com. Yeah?
Yes.
All right, cool.
Sean.
If you get conflicting information, what strategies would you use to resolve these conflicts? Like on construction dates on a house?
Yeah, so part of it is knowing the reliability of the information and double checking from multiple sources. So I will look at, does the Washington Post say something about when it was built? What do the tax records say? What does the real estate assessment say? I know the real estate assessment is unreliable. Set that one aside. Who was living, was that address occupied in the city directory for that year. That's one of the criteria I use. Tax records often more reliable because they show the first year that the house actually existed. You know, when you hit a year where there's no house there and the next year there was probably under construction during the year where there was no tax record of a house. Would have been occupied at some point during that. And you'd be surprised, Washington Post, they used to have local interest sections back in the 30s and 20s where they would talk about the happenings in Delray, the happenings in the town of Potomac. And interesting little tidbits about, you know, so-and-so went to visit their cousin in Richmond and just came back, things like that. So it's a matter of pulling the pieces together, and you know, when you hone in on a construction date, then you dig deeper in a more narrow time frame and I can't tell you when exactly my house was first occupied. I can tell you when the building permit was taken out. I can tell you, you know, when it was bought in October of 1904, the lot was bought. A person built a house. When he finished building it, when in 04 or 05 did he first occupy it? That I don't know. He wasn't an important enough person that that's going to show up in city records. But what I did find out was he was the first sheriff of the town of Potomac, or sergeant as they called it then. So, yeah, so finding those interesting tidbits like that. Any other questions? All right. I'm trying to get you back on schedule here.
We're okay, we're doing fine. Thank you so much. All right, our last speaker, thanks for waiting, Susan, is Susan Horn. Susan is the chair of the Alexandria Historical Restoration and Preservation Commission. That's the commission that's made up of appointees from the city council and from the governor that actually deals with the process of accepting historic easements, and I think you told me there was one or two in Delray that you one that you hold. Can you explain the process to us and how people would go about it? Thanks, Susan.
I'm sorry, I'm a little wobbly. I'm not a good recommendation for back surgery. Let me first say, the reason I spoke up when one of our presenters said something about the state office of historic preservation is because our local one is much more involved with the community, and that's the one I chair. We altogether have over 30 easements, almost all but one are down in the Old Town area. As one of our city architects once said, they all belong to rich white men, kind of thing. And we have tried now to expand it, but there's only one that I know of that is here in Delray, and that's on East Custis. And they're doing a major restoration job on that house. So in terms of, you know, my theory is that this commission was probably established, it was in the mid-60s. I don't know how many of you saw the town at that point. I did. We were stationed down on Fort Belvoir, and I fell in love with the old town. I was raised in Los Angeles, where I saw history disappearing daily. So it took me a few years after wandering the globe to get back here, and that was over 40 years ago. There were carpenters all over the place back then. But there were things that, you know, would have just disappeared, like the Lyceum, if people had, oh, Al, you are here. Al Cox, that I quoted him. Anyway, I think that it was formed somewhat as a defensive maneuver. You know, if you have easements on some of these properties, they are in perpetuity. And that's what this commission basically does. When we talk about how you go about getting an easement, it sounds like the criteria is a little unclear. It actually isn't. You know, it has to be of architectural, historical, cultural, social importance. So when somebody comes to this commission and says, I want to grant an easement on my house, or on the facade of my house, or on the vacant, the second lot that is part of the surround, we then say, fine, we will entertain the idea, but it has to meet some of that criteria, and you, the homeowner, have to do a lot of the legwork in terms of getting the history of that house, the, you know, what you just said, you know, really investigating who owned it, what did it look like, what's still there. And because some of our documentation was pretty elderly, we have updated it all, and the way a donor easement looks nowadays, it's literally 17 pages long. And it's because a very nice young man in the Attorney General's office really went to work for us. One of our handicaps is because we're chartered as a local and state entity, we do not right now have good legal representation, but we did get good legal help in updating that document. So now, if you come, not only do we say to you, go get a plat map, work up the history, we will come visit, and we will have an initial hearing, you know, for you to present your property. We have looked at it by that time, and in this document, it says, it doesn't just say the whole interior of the house. It says this mantle, that door, those floors, this, on the outside, it would reference, think of, do you know the Swan Dangerfield house on Prince Street? I reference it because it's just so interesting architecturally. In colonial times, women didn't trash their old dresses. They remade them. And I think of that house kind of in that way, because it's first a federal house, and then what we are looking at now, Al, you could help me, I would call it it's got this elaborate porch on it, and it was built up and then extended. So everything in the world's been done to it, but it's interesting because of all of that. And so we've just taken a new easement on it, and we've referenced it, each piece of this. Now, the BAR protects the facades in the old town. I don't know that they're as thorough as I would like them to be. We've seen some things happen that just should not have. But at any rate, we're trying to expand our scope. We want to particularly capture some of the African American history that isn't represented well with what we're holding. And I suspect I was asked to say something today about easements because it might be something else to put in your arsenal. You know, but the houses in Delray are terrifically interesting, and you've heard a lot about them today. And because we hold one, I think that gives us free hand to go ahead and take other easements. And that at least guarantees that nobody can tear something out. If it's in that easement, they can't tear down your building. If you got together, you know, and I want to say too, an easement doesn't have to be intrusive. I think that worries people. if you want to put a new kitchen in, bathrooms, to update something, you can certainly do that. But if you have, say, historic mantles, you can't tear those out if they're listed in the easement. That's why we're being so much more careful now, as to what we say. In terms of enforcement, that's all in the document as well, what happens. And what we do is we come in and we take the easement and hopefully every year to 2 years, members of the commission come out, visit the home, and with easement in hand, with a checklist in hand, and if anything is amiss, it could be mainly a maintenance problem, and that's what I find most of the time. Not somebody who's torn something apart, but just, well, let's face it, I've got painters at my house today who found a whole rotted side of the house. That's really wonderful to but that happens, with these old houses, and so that's more a maintenance thing, and we find that with some things too. Yeah.
Susan, 2 questions come to mind based on what you told us. Can a commercial property apply for an easement? That's number one. The second question is, are there any state or federal tax benefits to entering into an easement?
I will get there. Okay, but the first question, I don't know. I never thought about it. If you think of a couple of, well, in fact, the school, George Washington School, that's a beautiful old Art Deco building. I don't know. We have to find out.
It's on the register.
Huh?
It's on the National Register.
Well, if it is, I suppose that offers it some protection. It may not need one then. In the building that was, what, the telephone company? Yeah.
It's still owned by the telephone company.
Yeah. But I don't know why, I can think of one commercial building on King Street that I don't know how it got past the VAR. It's all a bunch of glass now out in front, and it was an old, well, it is an old historic building, but, come to think of it, we do hold one that is a commercial entity. So I don't see why we couldn't. In terms of tax benefits, it's twofold. First of all, the city does give a tax benefit that's in perpetuity. And they tell me that periodically they review it, that I don't know what periodically means. And the homeowners I know that hold easements haven't been able to find out too much about it. It's fairly subjective. What they do is when they're granting a tax break, they look at comparables, of what others have gotten. And then they supposedly update it, and I suspect that's when they have time. But that one holds. You sell the house, it holds. It still goes with the house. The other benefit comes from the IRS. That you would have to get an evaluation on the house by somebody who commercially does that. And then you give it to the IRS. And it's as, you're a donor. So it's a one-time tax break. You're donating an easement. And the IRS, based on this assessment, gives you that one-time tax break. But it's not something in perpetuity. So that is about our, yeah.
So it's the Loan Commission that actually holds the easement?
Right.
And how do you enforce it? Have you come across somebody who's just completely ruined the house and they say, so sue me?
We can. Okay, now you've got the other side of the sad side of this that we're trying to address right now. Our documents allow us to do exactly that. We usually are going to meet with whoever it is, and luckily, I've been on this commission for probably 10 years. I've never seen it happen. you know, people are pretty cooperative. You know, if we say you've got ivy climbing up, eating up your bricks, or your windows are deteriorating, you know, something like that, people are pretty good about and we give them time frames within which to do it. And then we go back and look at it. So it's not happened, but we need to be ready for it to happen. And technically, we can go to court. What we need, because we've got this funny charter that's state, local, our local people are not going to represent us. Believe me, I've tried in court. And the state office of the Attorney General was willing to do paperwork, but they've been reluctant about what I've asked them. Well, would you represent us? I suspect our remedy is going to be to find ways to raise money so we can hire legal representation. Okay. Yeah.
Quick question, I'm sorry, you're a city commission and the city will not
No, we're a chartered city state, and I imagine that happened because it was in the 1960s, and I don't know, it's an oddity.
But that hasn't happened recently.
Pardon?
Has that happened recently?
No, this was chartered in the 1960s.
No, I'm talking about if there's been a situation where your commission needed to have legal representation in the city.
Luckily, no.
Okay, good.
But we need to be ready for it.
Okay, last question.
Yeah.
I mean, I may be the only person who's this ignorant about the definition of terms here. So I lived in Minneapolis and we had an easement with our neighbor, which was that there was one driveway, gravel driveway, that went to my garage and his garage. He owned most of that driveway. And so there was a kind of continuing easement that we signed that I could actually drive on his driveway to get to my garage. So that's what I think of as an easement, is something that allows you to use something like that. So if I come to you and say, is it that I might come to you and say, I want an easement to remove the historic mantelpiece in my house? Would that be what I would be asking for? It's kind of the opposite.
No.
What is it?
If you came to us and said, I want to preserve this house, and it could be the floor plan, it could be the mantles. I just, mantles are a favorite of mine, so I thought about that. And there's a term, vernacular, which is, I think it translates to a house that was built in a certain time, and it's essentially preserved as it was in the original time. So the owner really wants to preserve pretty much the whole of it. But it has been altered in terms of kitchens and bathrooms. One of the, there's a garden club tour, I think, coming up, and that's one that you'll see some of the old townhouses. But I'm getting an idea today of thinking about a tour of the houses we hold easements on, so people could get an idea, and I think I see somebody that I know.
I don't think you've answered the question yet. Can you
Okay.
explain what a historic easement is?
What it essentially says, and you've signed a contract, an easement is a contract, but it's one that is in perpetuity, and it names things that can't be altered.
So is it just the one thing, like the mantle, or once you get the easement on the
No,
mantle?
you
it
could
goes
say,
then to the whole house?
we've started doing it that way, so we can be very specific about it. But you could say, I think a good house is the Lord Fairfax house on Cameron Street is pretty intact, and it's probably the most spectacular house in the old town. But that one, it's kind of the whole of it. Nothing there except things like the bathroom maybe. Alan, do you want to add something?
Susan, if you don't mind, I'll try and take a shot at answering the question about easement.
Yeah.
What you're doing in an easement is you are donating, saying that you're going to preserve certain specified objects. Could be the exterior architectural features, could be interior architectural features. And that distinguishes it from what the Board of Architectural Review can do because they're only looking at the exterior. In Susan's case, there are several houses in Old Town that have spectacular, intact Victorian interiors that are still stained woodwork with all the little parrots being knob and spool decoration. To come in and paint that, you've destroyed that character. So what you're doing by donating an easement to this group that holds that easement is you are, in theory, diminishing the value of your property slightly because you are putting a restriction on it. So when you go to sell it, you have to represent to that next owner, this has an easement on it, it's recorded on your deed, and you can't paint the interior. For that, you can get federal tax credits for your donation of that. And that's why Susan was saying you have to get a certified appraiser to come in and say, you've reduced the property value by this much. So it can be, as she said, as much as the footprint of the house, it can be the facade of the house only, and they don't go in the back or look at the back. It's a very flexible tool, and so the Long Name Commission works with you to identify those character-defining features that you're willing to give up. They're not going to go in your kitchen or your bathroom and say you can't replace the shower if those bathrooms are not listed, and only the mantle in the living room.
Very helpful. Yeah.
Real quick, just a quick comment, and I know you want to get going. I own the property that Ms. Horn is talking about in Delray. It has a facade.
That's why I said I thought I
Easement
somebody
on
in
it,
there.
which means it's only the exterior of the house. I'm not the one who initiated the easement, although I'm putting together pieces because there's a Potomac Information Collection Services packet. Regardless, I was not thrilled when I bought the house and I found it had this. I have since come to appreciate it. I cannot tear down the house, nor can anybody else tear it down and build a McMansion. They are flexible with me in terms of restoring its character and making adjustments to it. It's not like frozen in time. But I do appreciate it that it's there now, and it is a tool to be considered.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.
Put in 2 commercials. One of them is if you're interested in pursuing this as a homeowner, the Lloyd House is where Historic Alexandria is located, and the person to contact there is Daniel Lee, whose staffs our commission. My friends would thank me if I said, pay attention to a pump station that's to be erected on waterfront parks.
Thank you all for coming. We hit our mark just about at 1 o'clock. As I mentioned when we started out, there's a September 9th, this coming Tuesday evening Zoom meeting for this committee. If you want to join the committee or just check in to see how we're going to be discussing, sort of debriefing ourselves on this event, you may find it interesting. We'd love to have you on the committee because eventually we're going to need more volunteers. So thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have more questions, some of us who talked today will be hanging around for a little bit, I think. But if not, we're all reachable by email. So thanks for coming. Thank you.